Deep in the Oregon wilderness, where cell towers can't reach and GPS signals die, Maya Chen pressed her back against the cold stone wall of the crumbling watchtower. 6 months pregnant, broke, and hunted by men in black SUVs, she'd thought this forgotten relic would be her sanctuary. She was wrong. Behind a loose stone, her trembling fingers had found something impossible, a hidden room packed floor to ceiling with cash. $265 million in neat vacuum-sealed bundles. Drug money, cartel money, blood money. What Maya didn't know was that her faithful husband David hadn't just been an accountant. For 15 years, he'd been laundering money for the Medellin cartel, and when he vanished with their life savings, he'd left behind more than just debts. He'd left behind a death sentence with her name on it. The engine sounds were getting closer now. They'd found her. But here's what the killers hunting Maya didn't know. Before she became a suburban housewife, she'd spent 8 years as a Navy intelligence officer specializing in psychological warfare. The question isn't whether Maya can survive. The question is, how many of them will? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maya forced herself to breathe slowly, her hand instinctively moving to cradle her swollen belly. The baby kicked, as if sensing her mother's fear. 3 days ago she'd been planning a nursery. Now she was calculating how many exits this ancient tower might have. The sound of car doors slamming echoed through the forest. Male voices, speaking rapid Spanish. She caught fragments, her name, David's name, and a word that made her blood freeze. Eliminar. Eliminate. Maya's mind shifted into the cold, analytical mode she hadn't accessed in 8 years. The tower was 60 feet tall, built in the 1930s by the Civilian Conservation Corps. She'd researched it obsessively during her 2-day journey here, thinking it would be the perfect place to hide until she figured out how David had destroyed their lives. The hidden room changed everything. She moved carefully through the cramped space, her flashlight beam revealing stacks of bills in denominations she'd never seen outside of movies. Hundreds, thousands, bundled with industrial precision. Each package bore a small red stamp, a stylized eagle that meant nothing to her but would mean everything to the men outside. "Senora Chen!" The voice boomed from below, accented but clear. "We know you are here. Your husband, he steals from very dangerous people. You have 2 choices. Come down and we talk, or we come up and nobody talks ever again." Maya's hand found her phone automatically before she remembered. No signal. Even her satellite GPS had lost connection in this remote pocket of the Cascade Range. She was truly alone. But alone was where she'd learned to thrive. During her Navy years, she'd spent weeks in isolation, studying enemy psychology, learning to think 3 steps ahead of people who wanted her dead. Those skills had atrophied during 6 years of marriage to David, buried under dinner parties and baby registries and the comfortable lie that she was safe. David. Sweet, boring David who balanced spreadsheets and collected model trains. Who'd held her hair when morning sickness hit. Who'd kissed her goodbye every morning for 6 years with what she'd thought was love in his eyes. How long had it been lies? 2 minutes, senora, the voice called. Then we come up. Maya moved to the tower's single window, peering down through the cracked glass. 4 men, all armed. Black SUV with mud-covered plates, professional operation. They'd found her despite every precaution she'd taken, ditching her car in Portland, buying a burner phone with cash, hiking the last 12 miles through unmarked forest, which meant they had resources, government-level resources. Her mind catalogued the tower's defensive advantages. Single entrance, narrow spiral staircase that would force them to come up one at a time. Thick stone walls that would slow bullets. But they also had her trapped. The baby kicked again, harder this time. Maya whispered, "I know, little one. Mama's going to figure this out." She grabbed one of the cash bundles and examined it closely. The bills were real, but the packaging was wrong. Too neat, too organized. This wasn't just storage, it was preparation. Someone had been planning to move this money, someone who might come back for it. A plan began forming in her mind, born from years of turning disadvantages into weapons. The men below saw a pregnant woman with nowhere to run. They didn't see Lieutenant Maya Chen, who'd once convinced an entire terrorist cell that their leader was betraying them, watching them destroy each other from the inside. The footsteps on the metal staircase began. Maya smiled for the first time in 3 days. It wasn't a pleasant expression. Time to remind herself who she used to be. Maya's hands trembled as she stared at the bank statement, the numbers blurring through her tears. Negative $743. 3 credit cards maxed out. The mortgage 2 months overdue. David's business accounts, all of them, completely emptied. She pressed her palm against her still flat stomach, where their child grew, oblivious to the chaos surrounding its impending arrival. 6 weeks pregnant, and her world had imploded in the span of a single morning phone call from their financial advisor. Mrs. Chen, I'm afraid there's been some irregular activity on your accounts. We need you to come in immediately. Irregular activity. Such clinical words for the systematic destruction of everything she'd worked for. David had been siphoning money for months, maybe years, feeding it into some black hole she couldn't even begin to understand. The financial advisor's explanation had sounded like he was speaking underwater: shell companies, offshore accounts, federal investigations. Maya walked through their pristine suburban home, seeing it now as a monument to lies. The granite countertops they'd saved for, the hardwood floors she'd picked out board by board, the nursery they'd started planning last week. All of it would be gone within days. The foreclosure notice was already taped to their front door like a scarlet letter. Her phone buzzed, another call from a number she didn't recognize. They'd been coming all morning, reporters, investigators, creditors. She'd stopped answering after the third one asked if she'd known about her husband's criminal enterprise. Criminal enterprise. As if David was some kind of mastermind instead of the man who left dirty dishes in the sink and forgot to replace the toilet paper. The man who'd held her hair when morning sickness hit, who'd cried when she'd shown him the positive pregnancy test. Maya grabbed her laptop and searched for David's name. The results made her stomach lurch. The headlines screamed words like fraud, embezzlement, and federal charges. Photos of David in handcuffs being led away from his downtown office building, photos of their house with news vans parked outside. One article mentioned her by name, speculating about her involvement. She slammed the laptop shut and ran to the bathroom, dry heaving over the toilet. When the nausea passed, she caught sight of herself in the mirror, hollow-eyed, pale, looking far older than her 32 years. The doorbell rang, followed by aggressive knocking. Through the front window, she could see another news van pulling up. A reporter was already walking up their driveway, microphone in hand. Maya ran upstairs and stuffed clothes into a duffel bag, moving on pure instinct. She couldn't think beyond the immediate need to escape, to find somewhere quiet where she could process the magnitude of David's betrayal. Her mind went to her grandmother's old property, 40 acres of dense woodland 2 hours north, with a fire lookout tower that had been abandoned for decades. She'd inherited the land when Grandma Rose died 3 years ago, but had never done anything with it. David had wanted to sell it, said it was worthless, too remote to develop. Now she was grateful she'd resisted. The back door led to their neighbor's yard, and Maya slipped through the hedge line, cutting through 2 more properties before emerging on the street behind their house. Her car was parked there. She'd moved it the night before when the first news van appeared. As she drove north, Maya tried calling David's lawyer, the only contact she had. The conversation was brief and devastating. He's not talking to anyone right now, Mrs. Chen. My advice to you is to get your own legal representation immediately. The FBI will want to interview you about your knowledge of the financial irregularities. I didn't know anything. I trusted him completely. That's what you'll need to prove. The forest road to her grandmother's property was barely passable, overgrown with brambles that scraped against her car windows. She'd only visited the tower once as a child, 20 years ago, when Grandma Rose had told her stories about the old fire warden who'd lived there during the summers. The tower rose 90 feet above the canopy, its metal frame weathered but still solid. A narrow staircase wound around the outside, leading to a small cabin perched at the top. Maya climbed slowly, her legs shaking from exhaustion and shock. The cabin was a single room with windows on all sides, designed for spotting forest fires. Dust covered everything, but it was dry and secure. She could see for miles in every direction, nothing but endless green forest, no roads, no houses, no news vans. Maya sank onto an old wooden chair and finally allowed herself to cry, for her marriage, for her financial ruin, for the uncertain future of her unborn child. The silence of the forest wrapped around her like a blanket, and for the first time since the morning's revelations, she could breathe. She had no idea that beneath the tower's floorboards lay secrets worth killing for. The key felt warm against Maya's palm as she stood before the heavy wooden door at the tower's base. Her hands trembled, whether from the cold mountain air or the events of the past 24 hours, she couldn't tell. The lock turned with surprising ease, as if it had been recently maintained despite the tower's abandoned appearance. Inside, dust motes danced in the afternoon light, filtering through narrow windows. The circular room was sparse but clean, containing only a stone fireplace, a wooden table, and a narrow staircase spiraling upward along the curved wall. Maya dropped her duffel bag and pressed her back against the door, finally allowing herself to breathe. For the first time since discovering David's betrayal, she felt something approaching safety. The tower stood isolated, accessible only by the overgrown hiking trail she'd followed for 3 hours. Her car was hidden in a grove of pine trees a mile away. Even if David somehow tracked her here, she would see him coming. Maya placed a protective hand over her still flat stomach. "Just us now," she whispered to the child growing inside her. The baby David didn't even know existed. The baby who would never know its father, if she had anything to say about it. Her phone buzzed. Another call from David. She'd stopped answering after the 15th one this morning. The voicemails had evolved from panicked pleas to angry demands to what sounded suspiciously like threats. She powered off the device and shoved it into her bag. The afternoon light was fading fast. Maya climbed the spiral staircase, her footsteps echoing in the narrow space. The second floor contained a small bedroom with a single cot and a camping lantern. The third floor was empty, except for old wooden crates stacked against the walls. At the top, a trap door led to the tower's crown, a circular platform with a breathtaking view of the valley below. Maya descended back to the main floor and began exploring more thoroughly. Behind the staircase, she discovered a small pantry stocked with canned goods, bottled water, and camping supplies. Someone had been maintaining this place, preparing it. The realization sent a chill down her spine. She found a note tucked under a can of soup, written in her aunt's familiar handwriting. "Maya, if you're reading this, then things have gone very wrong. Check behind the loose stone at chest height on the north wall. Trust no one until you understand what David was really involved in. Eleanor." Maya's breath caught. David was really involved in? Her aunt had known about the embezzlement. But how? She located the north wall and ran her hands along the stones at chest height. The third stone from the corner wiggled when she pressed it. Behind it was a hollow space containing a leather envelope sealed with wax. Inside were photographs, black and white images of David meeting with men in expensive suits, David handing over briefcases, David entering buildings Maya didn't recognize. The final photograph showed David shaking hands with a man whose face made her blood freeze, Vincent Castellano, whose name appeared regularly in newspaper articles about organized crime investigations. Beneath the photos was a letter in Eleanor's handwriting. "Maya, your husband isn't just an embezzler. He's been laundering money for the Castellano family for over 2 years. The $3.2 million he stole wasn't just from his investment firm. It was money he was supposed to clean and return to them. By taking it, he signed both your death warrants." I've been investigating David for months, trying to gather enough evidence to take to the FBI. I never meant for you to get caught in the middle of this." Maya sank onto a wooden crate, her legs suddenly unable to support her. The money David had stolen belonged to the mob. No wonder he'd seemed so terrified when she confronted him. No wonder his voicemails had sounded increasingly desperate. She continued reading. "There's more money hidden here. $500,000 I managed to secure before everything fell apart. It's yours now. Use it to disappear, to start over somewhere far away. The money is hidden where grandfather's compass points true north." Maya remembered her grandfather's old brass compass that Eleanor had kept on her mantelpiece. But the compass wasn't here, and she had no idea what the cryptic message meant. A sound from outside made her freeze. The distant rumble of car engines winding up the mountain road, multiple vehicles. Maya crept to the window and peered through the glass. 3 black SUVs were climbing the access road that supposedly led nowhere. David must have remembered Eleanor mentioning the tower years ago. Or worse, maybe the Castellanos had ways of tracking people that she couldn't imagine. She grabbed her bag and the leather envelope, her mind racing. The money was here somewhere, but she was out of time. The vehicles were maybe 10 minutes away, and she was trapped in a tower with only one exit. Unless there wasn't just one exit. Old towers sometimes had escape routes, hidden passages designed for exactly this kind of situation. Maya began searching the walls with new urgency, running her hands along every stone, looking for anything that might reveal a secret way out. The tower's interior was worse than Maya had imagined. Dust motes danced in shafts of pale light filtering through broken windows, and the air tasted of decay and neglect. Water stains spread across the concrete walls like abstract paintings, and somewhere above she could hear the rhythmic drip of moisture hitting the floor. She set her duffel bag down and wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly questioning the sanity of this decision. The silence pressed against her eardrums, broken only by distant bird calls and the whisper of wind through the damaged structure. This wasn't shelter, it was a tomb. But it was hers, at least temporarily. No one would think to look for her here. David's associates, the FBI, creditors, they'd all expect her to run to family or friends, not disappear into the wilderness like some sort of hermit. Maya climbed the rusted spiral staircase, testing each step carefully. The metal groaned under her weight but held firm. The second floor was marginally better, with fewer broken windows and what appeared to be the remnants of an old office space. Electrical conduits snaked along the walls, and she wondered if any of them still carried power. On the third floor, she found something unexpected, recent footprints in the dust. Her breath caught in her throat as she knelt to examine them. The prints were large, clearly from work boots, and they led from the staircase to a corner where the concrete showed scrape marks. Someone had been here, and recently. Maya's hand instinctively moved to her belly. She should leave, right now, get back in her car and drive to the nearest police station, FBI field office, anywhere with people and protection. But where could she go that David's mess wouldn't follow her? She forced herself to breathe slowly, thinking it through. The footprints were old enough that dust had begun to settle over them again. Days, maybe weeks old. Whoever had been here was likely long gone. Still, she climbed the remaining floors quickly, her sneakers silent on the metal steps. The fourth floor revealed more of the same. Empty space, decay, and those same boot prints leading to various corners and walls. Someone had been searching for something. The top floor stopped her cold. Unlike the others, this level had been thoroughly ransacked. Chunks of concrete lay scattered across the floor where someone had attacked the walls with sledgehammers or crowbars. Electrical boxes hung open, their contents spilled. Even sections of flooring had been pried up, revealing the steel infrastructure beneath. But whoever had done this work had missed something. In the northeast corner, partially hidden by a fallen section of ceiling tile, Maya spotted something that made her pulse quicken. A small opening in the wall, barely larger than a shoebox, where someone had removed concrete blocks but failed to look inside. She approached carefully, pulling out her phone's flashlight. The beam revealed a metal box wedged deep in the cavity, nearly invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Maya reached in, her fingers brushing cold steel. The box was heavier than expected, roughly the size of a hardcover book, but much thicker. Her hands shook as she pulled it free and set it on the dusty floor. No lock, just a simple metal clasp, green with age. Inside, wrapped in deteriorating plastic, she found a stack of documents and photographs. The papers were yellowed but legible, covered in handwritten notes and what appeared to be financial records. But it was the photographs that made her stomach drop. David stared back at her from a dozen different images, but these weren't recent. His face was younger, maybe 10 years ago, before she'd even met him. He stood next to a man she didn't recognize, tall, silver-haired, wearing an expensive suit. In several photos, they were shaking hands over briefcases or examining documents together. Maya flipped through the papers, her confusion growing. Account numbers, transaction records, dates going back over a decade, names she'd never heard before, companies that didn't match anything from David's recent business dealings, and amounts. God, the amounts were staggering. Millions of dollars moving through accounts in the Cayman Islands, Switzerland, Luxembourg. Her husband hadn't just been embezzling from his current firm. This went back years, maybe to the very beginning of his career. The scope of it was breathtaking. But why were these records here, hidden in an abandoned fire tower in the middle of nowhere? A sound from below made her freeze, the distinctive creak of the metal staircase under someone's weight. Maya's blood turned to ice. She shoved the documents and photos back into the box, her movements clumsy with panic. The footsteps were methodical, unhurried, someone who knew exactly where they were going. She clutched the box to her chest and looked around desperately. No other exits, no way down except the stairs. The windows were too high, the drop to the forest floor certainly fatal. The footsteps reached the second floor and continued climbing. Maya pressed herself against the wall beside the stairwell opening, box hidden behind her back, and tried not to breathe. Whoever was coming had been here before. Those boot prints proved it. And now they'd returned to continue their search. Maya's hands trembled as she counted the bills for the third time. $237,000. The money felt surreal in her fingers, crisp hundreds bundled with rubber bands that had begun to crack with age. She'd hidden the duffel bag beneath a loose floorboard after her initial shock wore off, but sleep had been impossible. Every creak of the old tower made her heart race, expecting either the bag's owners or worse to come crashing through the door. Dawn filtered through the grimy windows, casting long shadows across the sparse room. Maya pressed her palm against her still flat belly, a habit she'd developed since discovering her pregnancy 3 weeks ago. Before David's world, their world, had collapsed entirely. The morning light revealed details she'd missed in yesterday's panic. Scratches on the wooden floor suggested furniture had been moved frequently. A small stack of newspapers sat wedged behind the door, yellowed and brittle. The dates stretched back 2 years. Someone had been using this place regularly and recently. Maya pulled the topmost newspaper free, scanning the headlines. Her blood chilled as she read about a string of robberies targeting high-end jewelry stores across the state. The estimated stolen merchandise totaled over $3 million. The investigation had gone cold after the primary suspect, Vincent Torino, died in a car accident while fleeing police. She grabbed another paper from deeper in the stack. More robbery coverage, but this time the focus had shifted to Torino's known associates. 3 men, all with extensive criminal records. One name made her stomach lurch: Marcus Chen. She recognized him from the news coverage of David's arrest. Chen had been mentioned as a potential accomplice, though charges were never filed. The pieces clicked together with horrifying clarity. David hadn't just embezzled money from his law firm's escrow accounts. He'd been laundering cash for criminals, using his position to legitimize stolen goods. The tower wasn't just a hiding place, it was a way station for dirty money. Maya's phone buzzed, making her jump. A text from her sister Rachel. Saw the news again this morning. Are you somewhere safe? Call me. She couldn't call. Not yet. Rachel would insist she come home to Portland, would want to fix everything with lawyers and proper channels, but Maya had learned that proper channels were a luxury she couldn't afford. The reporters camped outside her old house proved that. The frozen bank accounts demonstrated it. The creditors calling at all hours confirmed it. Another sound made her freeze entirely. Footsteps on the wooden stairs below. Maya grabbed the duffel bag and looked frantically around the small room. The windows were too high and narrow for escape. The door was the only way out, and someone was climbing toward it. Heavy boots, deliberate steps, taking time on each stair. She squeezed herself into the narrow space between an old cabinet and the wall, clutching the bag against her chest. The footsteps reached the top. A key turned in the lock. "Should be right where we left it," a gruff voice said. Vincent was paranoid about banks, but he wasn't stupid. Two men entered. Maya could see them through a gap in the cabinet's side panel. One was tall and lean with graying hair, the other shorter but powerfully built. Both wore expensive clothes that didn't match the rough way they moved. "Nothing here, Rico." The shorter man kicked at the floorboards. "You sure this is the right place?" Vincent's instructions were clear. Tower room, northwest corner, beneath the loose board. Rico's voice carried barely contained frustration. "Chen said the money would be here." Maya's heart hammered so loudly she was certain they'd hear it. The loose floorboard was 3 feet from where she hid. If they found it disturbed, if they noticed the scratches from where she'd pried it up. The tall man knelt and ran his hands across the floor. "Here. Board's definitely been moved recently." Rico joined him, and they lifted the plank together. Maya watched their expressions shift from anticipation to rage. "Son of a bitch." Rico slammed his fist against the wall. 2 years we've waited for the heat to die down, and someone beat us to it. Had to be Chen. He's the only other person who knew about this place. Chen's been in county lockup for 6 months on that assault charge. Try again. Maya pressed herself deeper into the shadows. These men weren't just going to leave. They'd tear the place apart looking for clues. Eventually, they'd find her. The shorter man was already moving around the room, checking every corner, every loose board. Whoever took it couldn't have gone far. This place is miles from anywhere. "Check the newspapers," Rico ordered. "See if anyone's been here since our last visit." Maya realized with growing horror that her fingerprints were all over those papers. Her DNA was probably scattered throughout the room. When they found evidence of her presence, they'd know someone had discovered their cache. They'd hunt her down. The baby seemed to flutter inside her, though she knew it was too early for movement. Just her imagination, her desperate need to protect this new life she carried. She had to run. The generator hummed to life on the third pull, filling the silence with its mechanical growl. Maya felt a surge of relief as the tower's bare bulb flickered on, casting harsh shadows across the wooden walls. She'd found the fuel canister in the storage room below, along with a collection of other supplies that suggested someone had lived here more recently than the dust would indicate. Her hands shook as she examined the briefcase's contents under the light. Stacks of $100 bills, neatly bound with rubber bands. A ledger filled with dates, amounts and cryptic notations in spidery handwriting. Bank account numbers, safety deposit box keys, and photographs, grainy surveillance shots of men in expensive suits entering and leaving buildings she didn't recognize. The baby kicked, a gentle reminder of the life growing inside her. Maya pressed her hand to her belly, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she'd stumbled into. This wasn't just money someone had forgotten about. This was evidence of something bigger, something dangerous. She picked up one of the photographs, studying the face of a silver-haired man stepping out of a black sedan. He looked familiar, though she couldn't place him. The back of the photo bore a date from 6 months ago and a single word, confirmation. A branch snapped outside. Maya's blood froze. She switched off the light, plunging the tower into darkness, and moved to the window. Through the trees, a beam of light swept back and forth in the distance. Then another. Flashlights. They'd found her. Moving by feel, she shoved the money back into the briefcase and latched it shut. The ledger and photographs went into her jacket pocket. She couldn't take everything, but she could take enough to understand what she was dealing with. The lights were getting closer. Multiple beams now converging on the tower from different directions. Maya counted at least 4, maybe 5. Professional search pattern. These weren't hikers who'd gotten lost. She grabbed her backpack and the briefcase, then felt her way to the ladder. The generator continued its steady rumble below. She'd have to leave it running or risk making noise trying to shut it down. They'd know someone was here, but maybe they'd think whoever it was had already fled. The voices reached her as she descended to the storage level. Tracks lead right here. Check the perimeter first. Once this done, clean. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. The way they spoke, clipped and efficient, reminded her of the security consultants David's firm sometimes hired, corporate fixers, the kind of people who made problems disappear. She pressed herself against the wall beside the window, briefcase clutched to her chest. The first flashlight beam swept across the glass, and she caught a glimpse of the man holding it, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing dark clothing. He moved with military precision. The front door rattled. Maya looked around desperately. There was no back exit from the storage level. The only way out was the door they were about to come through, or the window that faced directly toward where at least 2 more searchers waited. Then she remembered the loose floorboard she'd noticed earlier, near the back corner. It might just be rotten wood, or it might be something more useful. She crawled across the floor, running her hands over the boards until she found the one that gave slightly under pressure. Working her fingers around its edges, she pried it up just enough to feel cool air flowing from beneath. A voice from outside, doors locked, but the window latch is broken. Go around back. Miller, you're with me. Glass shattered. Heavy boots hit the floor above. Maya lifted the board higher and squeezed through the gap, briefcase first. She found herself in a crawl space beneath the tower, maybe 3 feet high. The air smelled of damp earth and old leaves. Behind her, she could hear footsteps overhead and the scrape of furniture being moved. She pulled the board back into place above her and started crawling away from the tower. The space seemed to extend beyond the building's foundation. Some kind of root cellar or storm shelter, maybe. Her fingers found wooden walls on either side, crude planking that guided her forward through the darkness. Generators still running. Someone was here recently. Check everything. Tear the place apart if you have to. Maya crawled faster, ignoring the sharp stones that bit into her knees. The wooden walls gave way to packed earth. She was in some kind of tunnel now, heading away from the tower. 20 feet, 30. The voices grew fainter. Finally, she felt cooler air on her face and saw a dim patch of lesser darkness ahead. The tunnel emerged behind a fallen log, completely hidden from view. Maya squeezed out and found herself 50 yards from the tower, watching flashlight beams dance through its windows. She'd escaped, but barely. And now she knew for certain that whatever was in this briefcase, people were willing to kill for it. The baby kicked again, harder this time, as if responding to her elevated heart rate. Maya clutched the briefcase tighter and melted back into the forest. The morning light filtered through the tower's grimy windows as Maya counted the bills for the 3rd time. $237,000, more money than she'd ever seen in cash, yet somehow it felt both like salvation and a death sentence wrapped in rubber bands. Her phone buzzed against the wooden floor where she'd placed it the night before. The caller ID made her stomach clench. Detective Rodriguez. She'd been dodging his calls since fleeing the city, knowing that Marcus's crimes would eventually circle back to her. With trembling fingers, she answered. Mrs. Chen, we need to talk. His voice carried the weight of official business. Your husband's case has taken some interesting turns. Maya pressed her back against the cold stone wall. I told you everything I know. I had no idea what Marcus was doing. That may be true, but we've discovered some concerning financial transfers. Large sums moved through accounts bearing your signature. Papers rustled in the background. We're going to need you to come in for questioning. The line went dead before Maya could respond. Her hands shook as she stared at the stacks of money surrounding her. Whatever Marcus had stolen, whoever these bills belonged to, she was now caught between the law and something far more dangerous. A sharp crack echoed from outside the tower. Maya froze, listening. Another sound followed, footsteps on dried leaves, deliberate and careful. She scrambled to gather the money, shoving bills back into the metal box with frantic movements. Through the narrow window, she glimpsed movement between the trees. Two figures in dark clothing advanced toward the tower with military precision. One carried something that glinted in the morning sun, a weapon. Maya's breath caught. They'd found her. She sealed the box and looked frantically around the circular room. The wooden stairs leading to the upper levels creaked ominously, but they might hold her weight. She grabbed her backpack and the metal box, then started climbing as quietly as possible. The second level was smaller, with windows on all sides that would make her visible from any angle. She continued upward, each step sending vibrations through the ancient structure. The third level was little more than a platform beneath the tower's peaked roof, but it offered something the others didn't, a narrow opening that led to the exterior maintenance ladder. Voices drifted up from below, male, professional, discussing search patterns like she was prey to be tracked. Maya clutched the metal box tighter and peered through a gap in the roof planks. The men had reached the tower's entrance. One spoke into a radio device while the other examined the ground near the door, probably studying her footprints. She'd been careless, too panicked to cover her tracks. "Building appears occupied," the first man reported. "Fresh prints, disturbed dust patterns. She's here." Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. She needed to move, but the maintenance ladder was exposed. If she climbed down while they were watching the exits, she'd be trapped in the open. But staying meant being cornered in a structure with only one way down. A new sound made her decision for her, the rumble of another vehicle approaching through the forest. More searchers, or possibly the police detective Rodriguez had promised to send. Either way, her window of escape was closing. She secured the backpack straps and gripped the metal box handle with her teeth, then squeezed through the roof opening. The maintenance ladder was a series of rusted iron rungs bolted to the tower's exterior stone. Decades of weather had loosened several bolts, and the metal groaned under her weight. 20 feet down, she paused and listened. The voices inside had moved to the second level. She had minutes, maybe less, before they checked the roof and spotted her descent. The final 10 feet passed in a blur of controlled panic. When her feet touched the ground, Maya found herself on the tower's blind side, hidden from both the entrance and the approaching vehicle. Through the trees, she could see a black SUV navigating the rough forest road. She ran. Branches tore at her clothes as she plunged deeper into the woods, following a deer path that angled away from both the tower and the access road. The metal box banged against her leg with each step, its weight a constant reminder of what she carried and what it might cost her. Behind her, shouts erupted from the tower. They'd discovered her escape route. The sound of pursuit crashed through the underbrush, but Maya had a head start and desperation driving her forward. She needed allies, information, and most importantly, she needed to understand exactly what Marcus had done and why these men were willing to kill for what she'd found. The money in the box was just the beginning. There had to be more hidden in that tower, and now she was the only one who knew where to look. The question was whether she'd live long enough to use that knowledge. Maya's hands trembled as she counted the bills for the third time. $50,000 in crisp hundreds, bundled with rubber bands that had left permanent indentations in the paper. The money felt surreal between her fingers, more substantial than the numbers in David's hidden accounts had ever seemed on a screen. She'd slept fitfully on the tower's wooden floor, using her jacket as a pillow and the emergency blanket from her car as covering. Every sound, whined through broken windows, settling timber, distant animal calls, had jolted her awake, but nothing had come for her in the night. Not yet. Dawn filtered through the forest canopy, casting dappled shadows across the bundles of cash spread before her. Maya tried to think rationally about what she'd found. Someone had hidden this money here deliberately. The plastic wrapping suggested they'd planned for it to stay hidden for a long time. But who? And why hadn't they come back for it? The sound of an engine in the distance made her blood freeze. She scrambled to gather the money, shoving bundles back into the bag with shaking hands. The engine grew louder, definitely heading toward the tower. Maya's mind raced through possibilities: Forest Service, hikers, hunters, or someone who knew exactly what was hidden here. She climbed the wooden ladder to the tower's upper level, dragging the bag with her. From the observation deck, she could see through the trees to where a black SUV was navigating the rough forest road. The same road she'd taken yesterday. The vehicle moved with purpose, not like lost tourists or casual visitors. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. She pressed herself against the tower's inner wall, clutching the money bag. Through a gap in the wooden boards, she watched the SUV pull up next to her Honda. Two men got out, one tall and lean in an expensive coat, the other shorter but broader, wearing work clothes and heavy boots. "A car's still here," the tall man said, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "She didn't leave." "Maybe she's dead already," the other replied with disturbing casualness. "Pregnant woman alone in the woods? Could be exposure, could be wildlife. Sterling doesn't pay us to make assumptions. We search until we find her, or we find proof she's gone." Sterling. Maya's breath caught. That was the name David had whispered in his sleep sometimes, usually during the weeks when he'd been most stressed about work. She'd asked him about it once, and he'd claimed it was just a client. But the way these men said the name suggested something much more dangerous. The lean man pulled out a phone. "She's definitely been here. Tire tracks match, and there are footprints leading to the tower." He paused, listening to whoever was on the other end. "Yes, sir. We'll check everything." Maya pressed herself lower as the men approached the tower's base. She could hear their footsteps on the wooden stairs, heavy and deliberate. The shorter man was breathing hard by the time they reached the main level. "Look at this place," he said. "Hasn't been maintained in years. Why would someone hide anything valuable here?" "Because nobody comes here anymore," the tall man replied. "Perfect hiding spot, if you could remember where you put it." They were moving around below, and Maya could hear them examining the walls, tapping on boards, searching methodically. Her phone buzzed softly, a text message. She nearly dropped it in her haste to silence the sound. The message was from an unknown number. "They're just the first. Take the money and run. Trust no one. A friend." Maya stared at the screen in disbelief. Someone else knew she was here. Someone knew about the money. But who and how? Below, the search had intensified. She heard one of the men say, "There's definitely been recent activity here. Disturbed dust, fresh scuff marks." A pause, but no sign of any cash. "Keep looking." Sterling was very specific about what might be hidden here. So they weren't just looking for her. They were looking for the money too, which meant they knew it existed, even if they didn't know exactly where it was hidden. Maya clutched the bag tighter, realizing she was holding something far more dangerous than she'd understood. Her phone buzzed again. "Move now. They have backup coming. Head northeast from the tower. There's an old mining road." Maya looked through the wooden slats toward the northeast. She could barely make out what might be a path through the dense forest. Whoever was texting her seemed to know the area well, but trusting a stranger felt almost as dangerous as staying put. The men below were getting closer to finding the hiding spot behind the loose board. It was only a matter of time before they realized the cash was already gone, and when they did, they'd start looking up. Maya made her decision. She slung the bag over her shoulder and moved carefully toward the tower's rear window. The drop to the ground was further than she'd like, especially with the baby to consider, but staying meant certain capture. She lowered herself through the window, hung briefly from the sill, and dropped. The morning air carried a bitter chill that cut through Maya's jacket as she made her way down the overgrown path leading away from the tower. Sleep had eluded her most of the night, her mind churning over the discovery of the hidden compartment and its contents. The cash felt heavy in her backpack, not just its physical weight, but the burden of questions it carried. She needed supplies, and more importantly, she needed information. The nearest town was Millbrook, a place she'd driven through once on a weekend trip with David years ago. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was now using what was likely his stolen money to survive his betrayal. The hiking trail connected to a service road after 2 miles, and from there, Maya caught a ride with a local contractor who didn't ask questions about why a pregnant woman was walking alone through the forest. Small mercies. Millbrook hadn't changed much. Still the same collection of weathered storefronts and pickup trucks parked at odd angles along Main Street. Maya kept her head down as she visited the pharmacy, grocery store, and finally the small public library housed in a converted Victorian mansion. The librarian, a woman with silver hair and kind eyes, pointed her toward the computer terminals without requiring a library card. Maya's fingers trembled slightly as she opened a web browser and searched for news about herself. The headlines made her stomach drop. Pregnant wife wanted in connection with husband's embezzlement. Maya Chen, accomplice or victim? Manhunt continues for missing woman. They were painting her as David's partner in crime. The articles mentioned offshore accounts, forged documents, and a sophisticated money laundering operation that had been running for 3 years. 3 years during which she'd been planning their future, decorating their home, trying to get pregnant. Her hands moved to her belly instinctively as she read about how authorities believed she'd helped David hide millions of dollars before his death. The FBI was offering a substantial reward for information leading to her arrest. Maya closed the browser and sat back, her heart racing. She wasn't just a grieving widow anymore, she was a fugitive. The thought of turning herself in crossed her mind, but who would believe her innocence when she couldn't even explain how she'd survived these past weeks without money or resources? She was about to leave when curiosity made her search for one more thing, the history of the fire tower. The results were sparse, mostly old forestry records and hiking guides, but one article from a local historical society caught her attention. The Millbrook Fire Tower served as a crucial lookout point from 1952 to 1987, when budget cuts led to its abandonment. During the 1970s, the tower was staffed by Ranger Thomas Brennan, who mysteriously disappeared in 1979 along with several $1,000s in cash collected from permit fees. Brennan's disappearance was never solved, and many locals believed he had simply taken the money and started a new life elsewhere. Maya's blood ran cold. Thomas Brennan. The name was familiar, but she couldn't place it. She searched deeper, finding a few more references to the missing ranger, including a grainy newspaper photo that showed a man in his 30s with dark hair and serious eyes. Something about his face nagged at her, but the library's closing announcement interrupted her thoughts. She printed what she could and stuffed the papers into her backpack alongside her other secrets. The walk back to the tower felt longer than the morning's journey. Maya's mind was racing with new possibilities. Had she stumbled upon Thomas Brennan's hidden stash? But that didn't explain the more recent items she'd found, the satellite phone, the high-end equipment. Someone else had been using the tower, someone who knew about Brennan's hiding place. As the tower came into view through the trees, Maya noticed something that made her freeze. The door, which she'd carefully closed that morning, was standing slightly ajar. Her first instinct was to run, but where could she go? Her car was gone, her money was limited, and she was wanted by the FBI. Instead, she crept closer, listening for any sounds from inside. The tower was silent, but signs of intrusion were everywhere. Her sleeping bag had been moved, her few possessions scattered across the floor. Someone had been here, searching for something. Maya climbed to the upper level, her heart pounding. The hidden compartment was still closed, but when she checked it, her worst fears were confirmed. The satellite phone was gone, along with several bundles of cash. Only her hastily scribbled notes and some of the older items remained. As she stood there, staring at the violated hiding place, a new sound reached her ears, the distant rumble of vehicles approaching through the forest, multiple engines moving slowly but deliberately along the service roads. Maya grabbed what remained of her supplies and the most critical evidence, stuffing everything into her backpack. The tower had been her sanctuary, but it was sanctuary no longer. Someone knew she was here, And they were coming. Maya's fingers trembled as she counted the bills again, spreading them across the wooden floor like a macabre deck of cards. $230,000. The number felt surreal, almost meaningless in the dim light filtering through the tower's cracked windows. She'd found the money wrapped in oilcloth, stuffed inside a rusted metal box, hidden beneath loose floorboards, in what appeared to be the tower's former radio room. The baby kicked, a sharp jab against her ribs that made her wince. She pressed her hand to her belly, whispering reassurances she didn't feel. The money could be their salvation, enough to disappear completely, to build a new life far from David's creditors and whatever shadows seemed to be closing in around this place. But the pristine condition of the bills, the careful way they'd been packaged and hidden, told her this wasn't some forgotten treasure. Someone would miss it, someone dangerous. A branch snapped outside. Maya froze, her heart hammering against her chest. The sound came from the east side of the tower, where the forest grew thick and dark. She'd learned to distinguish between the natural settling of old wood and the sounds that meant danger. This wasn't natural. Moving with practiced silence, she gathered the money, stuffing it back into the cloth wrapping. Her hands worked automatically while her mind raced. She'd been in the tower for 6 days now, and each day had brought new evidence that she wasn't alone in these woods. Fresh tire tracks on the old logging road, cigarette butts that hadn't been there the day before, the feeling of being watched that raised goosebumps along her arms even in the afternoon heat. Another sound, closer this time. Footsteps on the metal stairs outside. Maya's breath caught. She shoved the wrapped money into her backpack and looked frantically around the small room. The windows were too high and narrow to climb through, and the only door led to the stairs where someone was now climbing with deliberate, measured steps. The footfalls were heavy, purposeful, male. She pressed herself against the wall beside the door, clutching a rusted piece of metal she'd found earlier. Her pregnancy made her clumsy, off balance, but desperation sharpened her focus. The footsteps stopped just outside, Maya Chen. The voice was calm, almost conversational. "I know you're in there." She bit her lip to keep from making a sound. How did he know her name? How had he found her? "My name is Marcus Kellerman. I work for certain people who are missing something that belongs to them. Something you may have found." The door handle turned slowly. Maya raised the metal shard, knowing it was pathetic protection against whoever was about to enter. The door creaked open, and a tall man in an expensive suit stepped inside. He was older than she'd expected, maybe 60, with silver hair and the kind of calm confidence that came from wielding real power. His eyes swept the room and settled on her with something that might have been sympathy. "There you are." He held up his hands, showing he was unarmed. "I'm not here to hurt you, Mrs. Chen. Quite the opposite." "How do you know my name?" Her voice came out as a croak. "Your husband was careless. When he disappeared with our money, we looked into his life very thoroughly." Wife, Maya Chen, 28, former marketing executive, currently unemployed and approximately 6 months pregnant. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You've led us on quite a chase. I don't know anything about your money. David never told me." "I'm not talking about what your husband stole." Kellerman stepped closer, and Maya pressed harder against the wall. "I'm talking about what you found in this room, money that was hidden here long before you arrived. Money that belongs to my employers." Maya's mind raced. If the money she'd found belonged to these people, then David's crimes were just a coincidence. She'd stumbled into something much larger than her husband's embezzlement scheme. "I don't know what you're talking about," she lied. Kellerman's expression hardened. "Mrs. Chen, I've been very patient. My employers are not patient people. They want their property back, and they want the person who's been watching their cash sites eliminated. That person is you." "Cache sites?" The words slipped out before she could stop them. "Ah." His smile returned, predatory now. "So you do understand. Yes, there are others. This tower is just one of several locations where certain assets are stored. Assets that fund operations you wouldn't want to know about." Maya felt sick. She'd stumbled into something far worse than her husband's white-collar crimes. These people, whoever they were using the abandoned places in these woods to hide money for illegal operations. "Here's what's going to happen," Kellerman continued, pulling out a phone. "You're going to give me what you found, and then you're going to disappear. Permanently." The baby kicked again, harder this time, as if sensing the danger. Maya tightened her grip on the metal shard and made her choice. Maya's hands trembled as she stared at the photograph. The woman in the image looked exactly like her. Same dark hair, same angular cheekbones, same green eyes that seemed to pierce through the camera lens. But this wasn't her. The clothing was wrong, the hairstyle dated, and there was something harder in this woman's expression, a coldness Maya had never possessed. The photograph was tucked inside a leather journal she'd found beneath a loose floorboard in the tower's upper level. Her pregnancy made climbing the narrow stairs difficult, but curiosity had driven her upward despite her exhaustion. Now she wished she'd stayed below. She flipped through the journal's yellowed pages, her breath catching as she recognized locations from around the tower. The same clearing where she'd buried the duffel bags, the same rocky outcropping where she kept watch, the same hidden path she used to access the main road. But these photographs were old, decades old, judging by their faded quality. A name was written in faded ink on the journal's first page: Elena Vasquez. Maya sank onto the dusty floor, her back against the wall. The baby kicked, as if responding to her rising anxiety. She pressed her palm to her belly and tried to think rationally. The resemblance had to be coincidental. People had doppelgangers. It didn't mean anything. But as she continued reading, rational explanations crumbled. Elena's handwriting chronicled a story that felt impossibly familiar, a betrayal by someone she trusted, a desperate flight with stolen money, a refuge found in this very tower. The entries spanned months, documenting Elena's growing paranoia as she realized her pursuers wouldn't give up. "They know about the tower now," one entry read. "Miguel sold me out just like I knew he would. I have maybe hours before they arrive. The money is hidden where only family can find it. If something happens to me, I pray she'll understand why I had to disappear." Maya's blood ran cold. Family. Elena had mentioned family. She flipped to the journal's final pages, where loose papers were tucked between the leather binding. Birth certificates, adoption records, immigration documents. Her vision blurred as she scanned the text, but certain words leaped out at her: Elena Vasquez, mother, infant daughter, private adoption. Name changed to Maya Elena Chen. The journal slipped from her numb fingers. Elena Vasquez was her mother, the woman who'd abandoned her as a baby, leaving Maya to grow up believing her parents had died in a car accident, a lie her adoptive parents had maintained until their own deaths 5 years ago. The hidden fortune she'd discovered wasn't just random luck. Elena had left it for her. Somehow, impossibly, Maya had found her way to the exact place her birth mother had fled to 30 years ago. A sound from below jolted her back to the present. Footsteps on the tower's metal stairs, deliberate and cautious. Maya's heart hammered as she gathered the journal and papers, stuffing them into her jacket. She'd been so absorbed in reading that she'd lost track of time, forgotten to keep watch. The footsteps grew closer, multiple sets now, trying to move quietly but betrayed by the old metal structure's groans and creaks. Maya looked around desperately. The upper level had windows on all sides but no other exit. She was trapped 60 feet above ground with nowhere to run. The baby's movements intensified, as if sensing her panic. She pressed herself against the wall beside the stairwell entrance, holding her breath. Voices drifted up from below, 2 men speaking in hushed Spanish. She caught fragments: dinero encontrar viva o muerta, money, find, alive or dead. They'd found her. Maya's mind raced through options. The windows were too high to jump from, especially pregnant. The stairs were the only way down, and the men were climbing steadily upward. Her hand moved instinctively to the kitchen knife tucked in her belt, her only weapon against trained killers. The footsteps stopped just below the upper level. One of the men said something she couldn't quite hear, and his partner responded with a low chuckle. They knew she was trapped. But they didn't know about Elena's journal. They didn't know Maya had just discovered the truth about her past, or that her mother had faced this same terror in this same place 3 decades ago. Elena had died here. Maya was certain of that now, though the journal's final entries had left her fate unwritten. Maya closed her eyes and thought about the baby growing inside her. Another generation caught in this cycle of violence and stolen money. She wouldn't let it continue. When the first man's head appeared at the top of the stairs, Maya was ready. She'd positioned herself perfectly, and the knife was steady in her grip. Elena might not have survived, but Maya had something her mother hadn't: knowledge of what was coming. The man's eyes widened in surprise as he spotted her, but it was too late. Maya had already committed to her choice. Maya's hands trembled as she stared at the photograph Marcus had given her. The woman in the picture looked exactly like her. Same dark hair, same bone structure, same piercing green eyes. But this woman was standing next to a man Maya had never seen before, both of them smiling in front of the very tower where she now hid. "Who is she?" Maya whispered. Though part of her already suspected the answer would shatter everything she thought she knew about herself. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in the wooden chair, his weathered face grave. "Her name was Elena Vasquez. She was your mother." The photograph slipped from Maya's fingers, fluttering to the dusty floor. "My mother died when I was 3. Car accident. My father raised me alone." "That's what you were told." Marcus leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Elena didn't die in any accident. She was murdered, right here in this tower, 25 years ago." Maya's vision blurred. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if responding to her sudden surge of adrenaline. "You're lying. This is impossible." "Elena discovered the same thing you did, the hidden fortune, the laundering operation. But she wasn't just an innocent bystander who stumbled onto it." Marcus picked up the photograph, handling it like a sacred relic. "She was the accountant who set up the entire system." The room seemed to spin around Maya. She gripped the edge of the table, fighting waves of nausea that had nothing to do with pregnancy. No, that can't be right. Elena was brilliant with numbers, just like you. She created an intricate web of shell companies and offshore accounts for the Kozlov syndicate. But when she realized how deep the corruption went, how many people were being hurt, she tried to expose everything. Marcus's eyes were sad but unwavering. "They killed her for it. Made it look like she'd fled the country, then fed your father that story about the car accident." Maya's mind raced, connecting dots she'd never known existed. Her father's reluctance to talk about her mother, the way he'd moved them across the country when she was young, his insistence that she study accounting, his pride when she'd shown such natural talent with complex financial systems. "David knew," she breathed. "My husband knew who I was." Marcus nodded grimly. "David Chen has been working for the Kozlovs for years. When he learned you were Elena's daughter, he was ordered to marry you, keep you close. They thought you might know something about your mother's work, might lead them to whatever evidence she'd hidden." The betrayal cut deeper than any financial ruin. Every moment of their relationship had been a lie. Their courtship, their wedding, even the baby growing inside her, all of it orchestrated by people who'd murdered her mother. "But I never knew anything," Maya said, her voice hollow. "I had no idea about any of this until I found those account numbers. That's what saved your life, initially. As long as you seemed ignorant, you were useful to them. But when you discovered the money and transferred it..." Marcus shook his head. "Now you're the biggest threat they've ever faced." Maya forced herself to stand, pacing to the window despite her shaking legs. The forest stretched endlessly in every direction, but she no longer felt safe in its isolation. "How much do you know about what happened to her? To my mother?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thick with old grief. "I was supposed to protect her. I was FBI then, working undercover to infiltrate the Kozlov operation. Elena was my informant, feeding me intelligence about their money laundering. We thought we were close to bringing down the entire network, but they discovered her. Alexei Kozlov suspected a leak. He had Elena brought here to the tower. It was one of their safe houses then. They tortured her for information about who she was working with, what evidence existed. Marcus's hands clenched into fists. By the time I realized she was in danger and got here, it was too late. Maya pressed her forehead against the cool glass, trying to process the enormity of what she'd learned. So when I transferred their money, I completed what she started. In a way. But Maya, there's something else you need to know. Marcus stood, moving to join her at the window. Before she died, Elena hid something in this tower, evidence that could destroy the Kozlovs permanently. I've been searching for it for 25 years. Maya turned to face him, seeing new hope flickering in his weathered features. You think I can find it? You found the account numbers when no one else could. You have her mind, her instincts. Marcus placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Elena left you more than just her appearance. She left you the tools to finish what she started. Outside, a branch snapped in the underbrush. Both Maya and Marcus froze, listening. In the distance, barely audible, came the sound of vehicles approaching through the forest. They found us, Marcus whispered, already moving toward his rifle. Whatever we're going to do, we need to do it now. The static from Victor's radio crackled through the forest silence as Maya pressed herself against the tower's stone wall, her heart hammering against her ribs. She could hear multiple voices now, coordinating their approach from different directions. The net was tightening. Alpha Team, take the north approach. Beta, circle around to the service road. Victor's voice carried clearly in the cold air. Remember, we need her alive until we know where everything is hidden. Maya's hand instinctively moved to her stomach. The baby seemed to sense her terror, shifting restlessly inside her. She had maybe 10 minutes before they reached the tower, maybe less. The stolen documents and flash drives were still scattered across the upper room where she'd been studying them, trying to piece together the full scope of the conspiracy that had destroyed her life. But she'd found something else in those files, something that changed everything. The fortune hidden in the tower wasn't just stolen money, it was evidence. Bank records, communications, photographs that implicated not just David and Victor, but a network that reached into government contracts, defense spending, and offshore accounts belonging to senators and military officials, the kind of evidence that could topple administrations and send dozens of powerful people to prison for life. No wonder they wanted her dead. Maya forced herself to move, climbing the narrow stone stairs as quietly as possible. Her legs trembled with exhaustion and adrenaline, but she pushed forward. In the upper chamber, she began stuffing the most critical documents into her backpack, prioritizing the files that seemed most damaging. A USB drive labeled Blackwater Contracts went in first, followed by a manila envelope marked Senator Hayes, Payment Schedule. The beam of a flashlight swept across the tower's lower windows. They were here. Maya's breath caught as she heard the heavy wooden door creak open below. Footsteps echoed in the stone chamber, slow and deliberate. She grabbed the last of the crucial files and looked around desperately for another way out. The window was too high and narrow, and there was nowhere to hide in the sparse room. Maya. Victor's voice drifted up from below, deceptively gentle. I know you're here. Your car is outside, and those footprints in the mud tell quite a story. She remained silent, pressing herself into the shadows near the window. Her phone was dead, and even if it worked, there was no signal this deep in the forest. She was completely alone. You've seen the files by now, Victor continued, his footsteps beginning to ascend the stairs. You understand why this has to end here. It's not personal, you know. You're just in the wrong place with the wrong information. Maya's eyes fell on something she'd missed before. A narrow opening in the stone wall, barely visible behind a loose block. Her fingers explored the edges and found it moved. Behind it was a space just large enough for her backpack, maybe more. Without hesitation, she shoved the bag containing the evidence deep into the hidden compartment and pushed the stone back into place. Your husband was careless. Victor's voice was closer now, maybe halfway up the stairs. He thought he was so clever, skimming from our operations, building his own nest egg. But David never understood the bigger picture. This isn't about money, Maya. It's about power, control, the machinery that keeps certain people in their positions. Maya looked around frantically and spotted something that made her pulse quicken. A maintenance ladder bolted to the wall near the back corner, leading up to what must be the tower's roof access. It was old and rusted, but it might hold her weight. "The beauty of having you disappear out here," Victor continued, his voice now echoing from just below, "is that everyone will assume you couldn't handle the shame. Pregnant wife of an embezzler, overwhelmed by debt and scandal, takes her own life in a moment of despair. It's almost poetic." Maya grabbed the ladder's bottom rung and pulled herself up as quietly as possible. The metal groaned softly under her weight, but Victor's voice covered the sound. Each rung was a gamble. Would it hold? Would it make noise? Would he hear her? "The only question," Victor said, his voice now coming from the upper chamber, "is whether you'll make this easy or difficult." Maya reached the top of the ladder and found herself at a small hatch in the tower's roof. She pushed against it desperately, and after a moment of resistance, it gave way. Cold night air rushed in as she hauled herself onto the tower's narrow roof. Below, she heard Victor curse as he discovered the empty room. "Search everything," he barked into his radio. "She's here somewhere. Check for hidden passages, loose stones, anything, and get the thermal scanner from the van." Maya crouched on the roof, trying to stay low as flashlight beams swept the area around the tower's base. The forest stretched endlessly in every direction, dark and unwelcoming. But somewhere in that darkness was her only chance at survival. The storm had passed, leaving the forest draped in an eerie silence that made every footstep sound like thunder. Maya pressed herself against the cold stone wall of the tower's lower level, clutching the waterproof bag containing the flash drives and documents that could destroy Vincent Carver's empire. Her breath came in short, controlled puffs as she listened to the voices outside. "She's here somewhere," Detective Harrison's voice carried through the morning air. The thermal imaging picked up movement in this sector. Maya's blood ran cold. Harrison had found her, but she wasn't sure if he was here to help or to silence her permanently. The revelation that he'd been feeding information to unknown parties still gnawed at her trust. Through a gap in the stones, she watched his tall figure emerge from the tree line, flanked by two other men she didn't recognize. "Check the perimeter," Harrison ordered. She couldn't have gotten far in this weather. One of the men split off toward the eastern side of the tower, while the other began circling toward Maya's position. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she calculated her options. The tower's interior was a maze of collapsed sections and debris, but she knew it better than they did. She'd spent days memorizing every hiding spot, every escape route. Moving carefully, Maya crept toward the spiral staircase, keeping low. The stones were slick with moisture from the storm, and each step required careful placement. Behind her, she heard the scrape of boots on rock as one of the men found the tower's entrance. "Got something here?" the man called out. "Fresh footprints." Maya quickened her pace, ascending the stairs two at a time. She needed to reach the upper level where she'd prepared an emergency exit route. The wooden beam she'd positioned weeks ago extended from the tower's window to a massive oak tree. Risky, but her only chance if they cornered her. As she climbed, fragments of conversation drifted up from below. The men were inside now, their flashlight beams cutting through the gloom. But there was something else, another voice, crackling through what sounded like a radio. "Carver wants this wrapped up clean. No witnesses, no loose ends." Maya's stomach lurched. Harrison wasn't here to arrest her or protect her. He was here to eliminate her. The flash drives in her bag suddenly felt heavier, weighted with the knowledge that they represented her only insurance policy, and her death warrant rolled into one. Reaching the upper level, she moved swiftly toward the window, where her makeshift bridge waited. The oak tree's branches swayed gently in the post-storm breeze, and the gap between the tower and the tree looked impossibly wide in the pale morning light. Below, she could hear the men's voices growing closer, as they navigated the lower levels. "Maya Chen!" Harrison's voice echoed up the stairwell, suddenly formal and cold. "I know you're up there. Let's make this easy for both of us." She positioned herself at the window, testing the wooden beam's stability one final time. It held firm, though it creaked ominously under pressure. The bag's strap cut into her shoulder as she prepared to cross, but she couldn't leave the evidence behind. It was the only thing keeping her baby's future from being as dark as David's past. "You don't understand what you're dealing with," Harrison continued, his footsteps now on the stairs. "Carver has resources you can't imagine. People in every agency, every level of government. You can't run forever." Maya swung one leg over the windowsill, then the other. The beam was narrower than it had looked from inside, barely wide enough for her feet. 30 feet below, rocks and fallen branches created a jagged landscape that would mean certain death if she fell. She took her first step onto the beam, arms outstretched for balance. The wood flexed under her weight but held steady. Another step, then another. Behind her, she heard Harrison reach the upper level. There, his shout was followed by the unmistakable sound of a weapon being drawn. "Don't move!" Maya froze, halfway across the beam. To her left, Harrison stood in the tower window, his service pistol aimed at her back. To her right, the safety of the oak tree's thick branches remained tantalizingly close. Wind gusted through the forest canopy, causing the beam to vibrate slightly. "You're going to kill a pregnant woman?" Maya called over her shoulder, playing for time. "Is that what you signed up for when you became a cop?" For a moment, Harrison's aim wavered. In that instant of hesitation, Maya saw something flicker across his face, doubt, perhaps even shame. But then his radio crackled again, and his expression hardened. "You made your choice when you stole from Vincent Carver," he said, his finger moving to the trigger. "Now you live with the consequences." Maya closed her eyes and made her own choice. She leaped forward toward the oak tree, just as the gunshot shattered the morning silence. The pre-dawn darkness clung to the forest like a shroud as Maya crouched behind the massive oak tree, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. Her hand instinctively moved to her belly, feeling the gentle movements of her unborn child, a constant reminder of what she was fighting to protect. Through the skeletal branches, she could see the tower's silhouette against the starless sky, and the dark shapes moving around its base. They had found her. Marcus had arrived first, his expensive sedan gleaming incongruously among the wild undergrowth. 2 other vehicles followed, black SUVs that screamed corporate intimidation. Maya counted at least 6 figures emerging from the vehicles, their movements coordinated and purposeful. These weren't amateur treasure hunters, they were professionals. Her fingers tightened around the satellite phone Elena had given her before disappearing into the night. The FBI agent had promised backup was coming, but Maya could see flashlight beams beginning to sweep the area around the tower. Time was running out. A twig snapped behind her, and Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. She turned slowly, expecting to see one of Marcus's hired guns, but instead found herself face to face with Thomas Whitmore. The elderly man looked haggard, his usually pristine appearance disheveled, his eyes wild with desperation. "Maya," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the wind rustling through the bare branches. "Thank God. We need to get you out of here before they—" "Before they what?" Maya interrupted, studying his face in the dim light. "Before they find the money you've been looking for all these years." Thomas's expression shifted, a flicker of something, guilt, fear, crossing his weathered features. "You don't understand the danger you're in. These people, they'll stop at nothing to get what they came for." "You mean what your father stole?" Maya's voice carried a bitter edge. "The fortune he embezzled from the Blackwood Foundation? The same foundation that's been hunting for it ever since?" The old man's face crumpled. "How did you—" "Figure it out?" Maya shifted her position, keeping one eye on the activity near the tower. "Your father didn't just work for the foundation. He was their chief financial officer. When he disappeared in 1987, so did $40 million. Your family's sudden prosperity, the private schools, the investments, it all came from stolen money. Thomas's shoulders sagged. He was dying. Cancer. He knew he wouldn't live to see me graduate college, and my mother was already sick. He thought he was providing for us. And when you grew up, you realized what he'd done. You've been trying to find the rest of it ever since, haven't you? That's why you bought the property adjacent to the tower. That's why you've been so interested in my situation. I never wanted anyone to get hurt, Thomas said, his voice breaking. When your husband started nosing around, asking questions about old property records, I thought maybe he'd discovered something. But I never imagined he'd steal from his own clients to fund his search. A shout echoed from the direction of the tower, followed by the harsh beam of a spotlight sweeping across the tree line. Maya pressed herself closer to the oak's trunk, pulling Thomas down with her. "They're inside," she whispered, watching as the light emanated from the tower's windows. "They're searching the chambers. Did you find it?" Thomas asked urgently. "The rest of the money?" Maya's hand moved to the small device in her jacket pocket, an encrypted USB drive containing digital records of offshore accounts, cryptocurrency wallets, and investment portfolios worth far more than the original theft. Her husband had been right about one thing. The money was here, but not in the form anyone expected. "Your father was smarter than anyone gave him credit for," she said. "He didn't just steal the money, he invested it, grew it, created an entire shadow portfolio that's been generating returns for 35 years. Thomas stared at her, his face pale in the moonlight. "Where?" The sharp crack of a rifle shot cut through the night, followed immediately by shouting voices. Maya saw muzzle flashes near the tower's entrance, and her blood turned to ice. "Elena," she breathed. More gunfire erupted, the sounds echoing off the tower's stone walls. Thomas grabbed Maya's arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "We have to go. Now. My car is parked on the old logging road, about half a mile south. We can—" "Not running anymore," Maya said, shaking off his grasp. She pulled out the satellite phone and checked the signal strength. Still nothing. The gunfire stopped as suddenly as it had begun, leaving an ominous silence that seemed to press against Maya's eardrums. In the distance, she could see flashlight beams moving through the tower again. More systematic now, more thorough. Elena was either dead or captured, and Maya was alone in the darkness with a fortune that half a dozen dangerous people would kill for, and a baby depending on her to survive the night. The sound of boots on metal echoed through the tower as Maya pressed herself against the cold stone wall, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the narrow window, she could see 3 figures emerging from the tree line, their movements coordinated and purposeful. Vincent's men had found her. She clutched the leather satchel containing the bearer bonds closer to her chest, feeling the weight of millions in untraceable currency. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd fled from David's financial crimes only to become the keeper of what appeared to be an even larger criminal enterprise. But this money, whatever its origins, was her lifeline now. Her and her unborn child's only chance at survival. The tower's ancient timbers groaned as someone began ascending the stairs. Maya's mind raced through her options. The window was too high to jump from without serious injury, and there was nowhere to hide in the sparse upper room. The loose floorboard where she discovered the bonds gaped open, revealing the empty hiding place that had kept its secrets for decades. "We know you're up there, Maya." Vincent's voice drifted up from below, smooth and patient. "Let's discuss this like civilized people. You have something that belongs to my employer, and we'd like it back." Maya pressed her back harder against the stone, trying to think. She'd memorized every inch of this tower during her weeks of hiding, but escape routes had seemed unnecessary when she'd believed herself truly alone in this forgotten place. Now she cursed her complacency. "The money isn't yours either," she called down, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "I know about the Meridian accounts. I know what your employer did." A pause. Then Vincent's low chuckle. "You've been busy, haven't you? Your husband always said you were too curious for your own good. It's what made you such an excellent forensic accountant and such a dangerous loose end." The admission sent ice through her veins. They'd known about her all along, known she might eventually trace the connections between David's embezzlement and the larger conspiracy. She'd been naive to think she could simply disappear. Footsteps reached the landing below. Maya estimated she had perhaps 30 seconds before they reached her level. Her eyes swept the room desperately, landing on the heavy wooden beam that ran across the ceiling. It was her only chance. She stuffed the satchel into her jacket and zipped it tight, then grabbed the rope she'd been using to haul supplies up from the ground level. With practiced movements born of desperation, she threw it over the beam and began to climb, her muscles burning with the effort. Pregnancy had made her body feel foreign, but adrenaline gave her strength she didn't know she possessed. The door burst open just as she swung herself up onto the beam. Vincent entered first, his expensive suit incongruous in the rustic setting, followed by two men she didn't recognize. Their eyes immediately went to the open floorboard, then swept upward. "Clever," Vincent said, not seeming particularly concerned by her elevated position, "but ultimately pointless. You can't stay up there forever." "Watch me," Maya shot back, though she knew he was right. Her arms were already trembling from the exertion, and the beam, while solid, wasn't meant to support human weight for extended periods. One of Vincent's men was already examining the rope, calculating angles. Maya realized with growing horror that they could simply wait her out. Or worse, they could shoot her down like a treed animal. "Your husband was supposed to keep you out of this," Vincent continued, his tone almost conversational. "David thought he was so smart, skimming from the Meridian transfers to fund his own schemes. He never realized we were watching every transaction, allowing it to continue because it served our purposes." "What purposes?" Maya demanded, though she was beginning to piece it together herself. David's embezzlement had been a cover, a distraction from the much larger movement of funds through the same channels. Money laundering, naturally. David's clumsy theft provided the perfect explanation for any irregularities investigators might notice. "We intended to let him take the fall eventually, but then you started asking questions." The truth hit her like a physical blow. David hadn't just stolen from his clients. He'd unknowingly become part of a massive criminal operation, his greed making him the perfect patsy. And she, by trying to understand the scope of his crimes, had marked herself for elimination. Below her, one of the men had produced a gun. Maya's time was running out. But as she looked down at their confident faces, a desperate plan began to form. The tower was old, its timbers dry as kindling, and she still had the lighter she'd been using for her small cooking fire. Vincent was saying something else, but Maya was no longer listening. She was calculating distances, angles, and the time she'd have before smoke and flame would force her own escape. If she was going down, she wasn't going alone. The forest floor trembled beneath Maya's feet as she pressed deeper into the shadows, her breath coming in sharp bursts that clouded in the frigid air. Behind her, flashlight beams cut through the darkness like searching fingers, accompanied by the crack of boots on frozen leaves. Vincent's men had found her trail faster than she'd anticipated. Her hand instinctively moved to her rounded belly, feeling the reassuring flutter of life within. The baby had become more active in recent days, as if sensing the mounting tension. She couldn't fail now, not when she was so close to securing their future. The canvas bag containing the remaining bearer bonds felt impossibly heavy against her shoulder. She'd managed to hide most of Vincent's fortune in 3 separate locations, but this final cash represented her insurance policy. Without it, she'd have leverage but no guarantee of survival. A branch snapped somewhere to her left, too close for comfort. Maya veered right, staying low as she navigated between towering pines. The tower loomed ahead through the trees, its dark silhouette barely visible against the star-studded sky. She'd grown to think of it as sanctuary, but tonight it felt more like a trap. Her phone buzzed with an incoming text from Detective Chen. "Armed men spotted at forest entrance. Stay hidden, back up en route." Maya's throat tightened. Backup might arrive too late. She was on her own, just as she'd been since David's betrayal had shattered her world 3 months ago. The thought of her husband's lies still stung, but the pain had evolved into something harder, more useful: determination. Another flashlight beam swept dangerously close to her position. She ducked behind a massive oak, pressing her back against the rough bark. Through the gaps between trees, she could see at least 4 figures moving in a coordinated search pattern. Vincent had trained them well. The sound of her own heartbeat thundered in her ears as footsteps approached. A man's voice, gravelly and impatient, carried through the night air. "She can't have gone far. Pregnant woman alone in the woods. She's probably hiding nearby like a scared rabbit." Maya's jaw clenched. Let them underestimate her. She'd survived David's financial devastation, uncovered Vincent's money laundering operation, and turned the tables on men who'd killed without hesitation. A scared rabbit didn't accomplish those things. She waited until the footsteps moved past, then crept toward the tower's base. The hidden entrance she'd discovered weeks ago remained concealed behind a curtain of dead vines. Once inside, she could access the emergency radio she'd installed and coordinate with Chen's team. But as she reached for the concealed latch, a hand clamped down on her shoulder. "Going somewhere, Maya?" She spun around to face Vincent himself, his pale eyes reflecting the moonlight like chips of ice. He looked older than when she'd first encountered him in David's office, more desperate, more dangerous. The elegant businessman facade had cracked, revealing something predatory underneath. "I have to admit, you've impressed me," he continued, his grip tightening. "David described you as a naive housewife who never questioned where the money came from. Clearly, he didn't know his wife very well." Maya forced herself to remain calm, even as her pulse raced. David didn't know a lot of things, like how his partners were using his company to clean blood money. Vincent's laugh was cold and humorless. "Blood money? How dramatic. I prefer to think of it as a redistribution of resources. Your husband was quite happy to benefit from those resources for years, until his conscience got the better of him." "Until his conscience made him stupid," Vincent corrected. "Just like you're being stupid now. Give me the bonds, Maya. All of them. And I might let you and your baby walk away from this." Maya's hand moved slowly toward the bag's zipper, but her eyes never left Vincent's face. "How do I know you won't kill me anyway? You've eliminated everyone else who knew about your operation. Because you're valuable to me alive. The perfect witness to testify that David acted alone, that he stole from my legitimate business ventures. A grieving widow seeking justice for her husband's victims." The calculating coldness in his voice made Maya's skin crawl. Even now, Vincent was thinking 3 moves ahead, planning how to manipulate the narrative. But he'd made one crucial miscalculation. "There's just one problem with your plan," Maya said, her fingers finding the small device hidden in the bag's side pocket. "I'm not grieving anymore. I'm angry." The words served as her signal. Floodlights suddenly blazed to life around the tower's perimeter, turning night into harsh day. Vincent stumbled backward, momentarily blinded, as armed figures in tactical gear emerged from concealment positions Maya had helped establish hours earlier. "Vincent Kessler, you're under arrest," Detective Chen's amplified voice boomed through the clearing. Maya smiled as Vincent's face transformed from confidence to fury, to the dawning realization that he'd been outmaneuvered. The hunter had become the hunted, and Maya had orchestrated it all. Maya pressed her back against the cold stone wall of the tower's upper chamber, clutching the metal briefcase containing the last of the stolen bonds. Through the narrow window, she could see headlights cutting through the forest darkness below. 3 vehicles, maybe 4, they'd found her. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing her terror. She placed a protective hand over her swollen belly and tried to steady her breathing. Detective Torres had promised backup would arrive within the hour, but that was 40 minutes ago. The men climbing toward her position wouldn't wait. Heavy footsteps echoed up the spiral staircase, multiple sets, moving fast but careful. Maya had barricaded the lower entrance with fallen timber, but it would only slow them down. She needed another way out. Her eyes swept the circular chamber, landing on the rope she'd used to haul supplies up from below. It was still anchored to the iron ring embedded in the wall, the same ring where her husband David had hidden his first cache of stolen bearer bonds months before his death. The rope extended down the tower's exterior wall to a narrow ledge she'd spotted during her initial exploration. "Maya Chen!" The voice boomed from below, distorted by the stone walls. She recognized it immediately. Markus Volkov, the Russian financier whose missing millions had started this nightmare. "You have something that belongs to me." She almost laughed at the audacity. Nothing in that briefcase belonged to him. It was all stolen money from pension funds and charity accounts that David had systematically looted during his final year of life. But Volkov's syndicate had been using David's bank as their money laundering operation, and they wanted their cut back. "Your husband made a deal," Volkov called out, his voice closer now. "His death doesn't void our agreement." Maya grabbed the rope and tested its strength. The hemp was weathered but thick. She'd have to trust it would hold her weight, plus the babies. The alternative was facing Volkov's men with nothing but the small pistol Torres had given her, and she'd never fired a gun in her life. The barricade below exploded inward with a crash of splintering wood. They'd brought tools. She clipped the briefcase to her belt and swung her leg over the windowsill. The forest floor was 60 feet below, shrouded in darkness. The ledge was only 20 feet down, but in her condition it might as well be 1,000. "Movement upstairs!" someone shouted in accented English. Maya grabbed the rope with both hands and pushed off from the window. Her shoulders screamed as they took her full weight, but the rope held. Hand over hand, she lowered herself toward the ledge, trying to ignore the way the rough hemp tore at her palms. Above her, a flashlight beam swept through the window she'd just vacated. Angry voices overlapped in Russian. She pressed herself against the tower wall and kept descending. The ledge was narrower than it had appeared from above, barely 18 inches of crumbling stone that circled the tower's midsection. Maya's feet touched down just as more lights appeared in the upper window. She hugged the wall and began working her way around to the tower's far side, where thick pine branches offered potential cover. A gunshot cracked through the night air, but not from above. It came from the forest below, followed by shouts and the staccato burst of automatic weapons fire. Torres's backup had arrived. Maya used the distraction to move faster along the ledge. Her fingers found purchase in gaps between the ancient stones as she inched toward the cluster of pines. The briefcase banged against her hip with each step, threatening to throw off her balance. Another shot, closer this time. Then a scream that cut off abruptly. "Maya!" Torres's voice echoed up from the forest floor. "Maya, if you can hear me, stay where you are." She wanted to call back, but movement in the window above stopped her. A rifle barrel emerged, followed by a scope that gleamed in the moonlight. Volkov's sniper was scanning the area below. The pine branch was just out of reach. Maya stretched toward it, her feet barely maintaining contact with the crumbling ledge. The briefcase shifted, pulling her off balance. For a terrifying moment, she teetered over empty space with 60 feet of darkness yawning below. Her fingers closed around rough bark just as her feet slipped completely. She swung outward, suspended only by her grip on the branch and the briefcase strap cutting into her shoulder. The baby moved frantically inside her, responding to the surge of adrenaline flooding her system. The rifle above swung toward her position. Maya pulled herself hand over hand along the branch, using the thick canopy to shield her from the sniper's view. Behind her, the tower erupted in gunfire as Torres's team engaged Volkov's men. She was close enough now to see muzzle flashes through the trees below, close enough to smell gunpowder and hear Detective Torres shouting tactical commands to his officers. But she was also close enough to hear Volkov's voice, cold and determined, cutting through the chaos. "Find the woman. Kill anyone who gets in your way."